Hello, friends. Was the unsinkable Titanic doomed from the beginning? The world's largest ship set sail on April 10, 1912, but it collided with an iceberg just a few days later. Warnings were ignored, and a disaster occurred. What exactly went wrong? Let us find out. This is the incident of April 10, 1912. RMS Titanic was the world's largest and most luxurious ship of its time. It set out for its first voyage. It traveled from Southampton, England, to New York. There were a variety of people on board, including well-known industrialists and actors, as well as immigrants seeking a better life in America. Senior Captain Edward John Smith, 62, was in command. There was a lot of excitement surrounding this ship among the passengers, public, and media. Not only was it the world's largest ship, approximately 269 meters long and more than 53 meters tall, but the luxury aboard was breathtaking. The ship cost $7.5 million to build back then, which is equivalent to $400 million today, after accounting for inflation. The ship's facilities and decorations could even surpass those of a five-star hotel. Stained glass mirrors, ornate wood paneling, 2 grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, a gym, a squash court, 4 restaurants, 2 barber shops, and even a library. Furthermore, the kind of safety features that were used to build the Titanic, this ship was thought to be unsinkable. It was a ship that would never sink. It was so safe. White Star Line was the company that built this ship. The vice president of this company was so confident that he stood in front of the public and declared that this ship was unsinkable. However, 2 days after embarking on its first voyage, on April 12, 1912, Titanic began to receive its first ice warnings. The Atlantic Ocean that the Titanic was crossing to get to America was full of ice. There were mountains of ice, icebergs that posed a threat to this ship. These warnings are not unusual. The ships that sail the oceans frequently communicate through radio and signal the nearby ships that ice is present in their vicinity and seek caution in their path. After receiving these warnings, the Titanic changed course twice to avoid danger, but it did not reduce its speed. It continued its journey towards its destination at a speed of 21.5 knots, which is equivalent to 40 kilometers per hour. 2 days later, on April 14, 1912, there were 7 more ice warnings, which Captain Smith and his crew ignored. They did not reduce the speed of the Titanic. The day slowly comes to an end as the sun sets and the temperature drops. On the night of April 14th, the moon was not visible. Without the moon, there was no moonlight, and visibility was low that night. There was a crow's nest on the ship, a small platform at a height that could be described as a lookout point. Someone is made to sit atop it so that they can keep watch on the ship's track and look out for traffic or obstructions. The person sitting here has to face extremely low temperatures. The cold winds blew very fast. Furthermore, it was night. The cold winds caused the eyes to tear up, making it difficult to see. At 11:39 p.m., a man named Frederick Fleet was on top of the crow's nest. Suddenly, he saw before him a huge iceberg. He rang the bell 3 times quickly to alert the people below before picking up the phone and calling the officers on the bridge. He screams that there was an iceberg in front of them and that the ship needed to be steered immediately. The first officer, William, heard this message and signaled the engine room that the ship should be steered in the left direction. Unfortunately, it was too late. Just 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the ship collided with the iceberg. The Titanic represented a new type of luxury lifestyle. The Titanic left the port of Southampton, England. Many of the passengers were wealthy and influential. The band plays, the gay tunes, and American red-time dancers. The time was 11:40. The iceberg touched the ship's right side. She suddenly lifted up quickly. This iceberg was not small. It was 200 by 400 feet in length, as big as a football field, and was so tall that it matched the height of the crow's nest. Scientists estimate that the iceberg weighed up to 1.5 million tons. Titanic's front right side collided with an iceberg, specifically near the bow. So, what is the bow? The bow can be seen right at the front in this picture. The protruded part below the bow is called the keel, while the part above the bow is called the stern. For about 10 seconds, the ship grazed against the iceberg, creating a massive dent. As a result, small holes formed in the main body of the ship. You might wonder how this is possible. How does a piece of ice tear through metal? If you use the ice in your fridge, it will not cut through metal. But consider the weight of a mountain of ice. True, even wood can't cut through metal. However, even then, your metal car can crash into a tree and become completely deformed. Similarly, since the iceberg was so large and heavy, it caused massive damage to the Titanic. A few seconds after the collision, the ship's captain, Smith, and architect Thomas Andrews arrived at the site to see how much damage the ship had incurred from the impact. When they saw, they realized the ship would sink. They were completely shocked when they saw this. They believed that this ship was unsinkable. At the start of the video, I mentioned that this ship was considered unsinkable due to impressive safety features. There were two major safety features that contributed to this belief. First, the ship had a double-bottom hull. The main body of a ship is known as the hull. A double-bottomed hull would indicate two layers. Even if the layer below is damaged, the second layer may save the ship. Second, the hull of the ship was divided into 16 separate watertight compartments. Even if 4 of the 16 compartments were filled with water, the ship could still sail. It would make no difference for the ship. However, the iceberg caused an impact on the ship's side. The double-bottom hull proved ineffective. The sides only had a single layer. Second, the impact was so large that 6 of the 16 watertight compartments were breached. Water was filling each of them. The limit was 4. The inundation of 6 compartments meant that the ship could not be rescued from sinking. The unsinkable ship would sink. Captain Smith ordered his crew to issue a distress call via radio 20 minutes after the collision. The nearby ships may detect it and respond to save them. Jack Phillips, a senior radio operator, emerges as the story's hero. He began sending distress signals one after another but received no response. He sent another, then another. There must be a ship out there that would answer their distress call. 20 minutes later, a ship named RMS Carpathia was spotted near the Titanic. It detected the signal. He communicated with the Titanic's operator via radio and directed his ship to approach the Titanic and rescue them. The problem was that despite being so close, this ship was 107 kilometers away. Even at top speed, it would take 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic. Would the Titanic float for 3.5 hours? The rest of the crew members set off flares and rockets in the sky, hoping that a nearby ship would notice them. However, other than the Carpathia, no other ship responded. Meanwhile, Captain Smith ordered that passengers be evacuated using the ship's lifeboats. According to protocol, women and children will be given priority when boarding the lifeboats. The passengers on the ship were not particularly scared. The majority of the passengers believed the Titanic was unsinkable, and there was no reason to be concerned. After all, the company that ran the ads claimed this repeatedly. So yes, they may have hit an iceberg, but the ship would not sink. As a result, the first lifeboat that went down had a capacity of 65 people, but only 28 boarded. Half of the lifeboat remained empty as it was lowered. As time passed, compartments were gradually filled with water. The ship started to tilt. The passengers gradually realized that the ship could sink. When this realization hit, there was chaos and people started running around in panic. By 1 a.m., the front compartments were so full of water that the ship's bow was submerged. As a result, the Titanic's rear section rose above water. The propellers in the back came up out of the water. When the ship tilted to this degree, chaos ensued. People began fighting for a seat on the lifeboat. The problem was that there were only 20 lifeboats on the ship, with a capacity of approximately 1,200 people each. However, there were approximately 2,200 people aboard the ship. The Titanic's last lifeboat was lowered at 2:05 a.m. However, 1,500 people were still aboard. During the chaos, some people attempted to snatch a spot on the lifeboats, but some people had accepted their fate and remained on the ship. The ending was chaotic. Everyone was crying, praying, and trying to get into the few lifeboats that remained. Oh, it was, quite sad at the end. According to eyewitnesses, the ship split into two halves around 2:20 and then slowly began to sink. It took less than 3 hours for the unsinkable ship to sink. Of the 1,500 people on board, either they drowned with the ship or died of hypothermia if they knew how to swim. The temperature of the water was -2 degrees Celsius. If you fell into the water at this temperature, you would die within minutes from hypothermia. It is said that Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, remained at the wheel until the end and drowned with the ship. Some people believe he committed suicide by killing himself. The RMS Carpathia, which had set out to save the Titanic, arrived at this location around 3:30 to 4 a.m. to save the people on board, but it was an hour late. Following the Titanic disaster, questions were raised, many controversies arose, investigations were carried out, and some previously unknown facts surfaced, shocking everyone. How would you feel if I told you that another ship was 37 kilometers away from the Titanic that night and could have arrived in time to save the Titanic's passengers? It is true that the ship was the SS Californian. The SS Californian issued the final iceberg warning 1 hour before the Titanic collided with it. They had warned, "Watch out. There are many icebergs in the ocean here." After that, at 11:15, the radio operator on the Californian ship turned the radio off. The Californian ship had paused for the night and was not moving forward, keeping the danger in mind. The ship did not receive the distress signal because it had stopped for the night and had turned off its radio. The ship was close enough to the Titanic that passengers on the Titanic's deck could see it on the horizon. When the officers were boarding the Titanic, one of them remarked that he could see a ship in the distance and that it would come to save them soon, so there was no need to worry. Despite the fact that rockets and flares were lit, this Californian ship failed to arrive. According to reports, after 12 a.m., the crew members on the Californian ship saw Titanic's rockets being fired. They even informed their captain, Stanley Lord, but he insisted that it was not a distress signal, but rather the rich men on the Titanic who were partying. If Captain Lord of the Californian ship had taken the rockets and flares seriously that night, many people on the Titanic could have been saved. The next morning, when they turned on their radio, they received Titanic's SOS calls. When they arrived at the site, it was already too late. They only saw corpses floating in the water. Both inquiries into this matter placed the blame on Captain Lord of the Californian. But a single man cannot be held responsible for such a massive disaster. Other people were also responsible. Like the lifeboat example I mentioned, there were insufficient lifeboats because the ship's manufacturer believed it was unsinkable, and lifeboats were unnecessary. Apart from that, the captain of the Titanic had not even practiced safety drills. A safety drill was scheduled for the day the Titanic collided with the iceberg, but the captain canceled it because he believed the ship was unsinkable. The next mistake was made by steersman Robert Hichens, who was at the wheel. When an iceberg alarm went off that night, the officer on deck instructed the ship to turn left. However, in a panic, Robert Hichens misinterpreted the message and steered the ship to the right. This was the opposite direction towards the iceberg. He realized his mistake too late. A British investigation also discovered that the Titanic received numerous iceberg warnings and was instructed to proceed with caution, but the ship continued to sail at full speed. Why did that happen? Why didn't the captain slow down? There are numerous theories behind this. A popular theory holds that Joseph Bruce, the chairman and managing director of White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic, influenced Captain Smith and pressed him to keep the ship's speed up. The company put a lot of pressure on the ship to complete its first voyage in 6 days so that they could break a record and show that the Titanic was not only the biggest, most expensive, and fastest ship. A specific incident occurred on April 14th at 2 p.m. when Captain Smith saw the ice warning and informed Joseph that they should reduce their speed due to the ice warning. However, Joseph stuffed the paper in his pocket so that the people and crew members would not find out. He didn't want the ship to slow down. This single disaster permanently altered the global landscape of the industry. Many new regulations and standards were enacted to prevent similar disasters in the future. In 1914, an international ice patrol was established to warn approaching ships of icebergs in their path. A treaty, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was signed, setting new standards for ships. For example, a lifeboat regulation was enacted, requiring ships to have an adequate number of lifeboats for each passenger. When the Titanic sank, it took over 70 years to discover its wreckage beneath the sea. In September 1985, an American ocean explorer, Robert Ballard, and a French oceanographer discovered the Titanic under the sea. Its wreckage was discovered 3,800 meters, 3.8 kilometers, below the sea. Two separate pieces of the ship were discovered, 600 meters apart. Today, many years after the ship sank, the environment has begun to erode the ship's underwater remains. This is what the actual ship looked like, and it is all that remains today. It has been reported that bacteria and other organisms are eroding its metal framework. It is expected that by 2030, this ship will have completely disintegrated underwater. Even after 110 years, people continue to be fascinated by the Titanic. In 2012, Clive Palmer, an Australian billionaire, announced plans to create Titanic 2, a replica of the original Titanic. He even stated that it would sail along the same route. All of the ship's components were to be built in the same way as the original. Originally scheduled for completion in 2016, the project has yet to be completed, even in 2022, due to delays. People are said to be uninterested in this project because if an exact replica of the Titanic was built, it would have no TV or Wi-Fi, and no one would want to board it. It's possible that the unsinkable Titanic 2 sank before it set sail.